Upon opening the nasal septum, we can already see the nasal conchae, but starting with the nostrils, directly caudal to it is the nasal vestibule. Just after the remnant of the nasal septum, we can see the alar fold. Dorsal to is the straight fold, and the continuation of the alar fold is the ventral nasal concha, and the continuation of the straight fold is the dorsal nasal concha. Now, the space between the nasal bone and the dorsal nasal concha is called the dorsal nasal meatus, and the space between the dorsal nasal concha and the ventral nasal concha is the middle nasal concha, and lastly, the space between the ventral nasal concha and the maxilla bone is the ventral nasal meatus. The maze or labyrinth-like structure caudal to the nasal conchae is the ethmoid labyrinth, and directly following the ethmoid labyrinth is the ethmoid bone. After the air fills up the nasal cavity, it will enter the nasopharynx, and after it is the soft palate, which is the indicator of the end of the nasal cavity in the oral cavity and the start of the pharynx. The fold connecting the soft palate and the tongue is called the palatoglossal fold or arch, and these are the palatine ridges. Now, the fold connecting the epiglottis and the tongue is the glossoepiglottic fold. Lateral to the epiglottis, where the food gets stuck, is the piriform recess. The prominence on the epiglottis are the cuneiform tubercles. Going over the cartilages of the larynx, first is the epiglottis or the epiglottic cartilage. Ventral is the cricoid cartilage, which encloses the trachea and the thyroid cartilage. After opening the ventral portion of the trachea, we can now see the larynx or the voice box and the voice vocal fold. And the muscle of the trachea is the muscle trachealis. We can also notice that the trachea is C-shaped. These are the rings of the trachea with a totality of 35 rings, and the ligaments connecting each ring are the annular ligaments. Then the trachea will then branch out into the left and right bronchi. Then we will now open the rib cage by cutting it through the costochondrial junction and flap it dorsally. Upon opening the thoracic cavity, you will see the endothoracic fascia and the pleura, the costal parietal pleura, diaphragmatic parietal pleura, and the mediastinal pleura. The visceral pleura encloses the surface of the lungs. Next is the mediastinum. We have the cranial mediastinum, cranial of the heart, and middle mediastinum, where the heart lies, and the caudal mediastinum, caudal of the heart up until the diaphragm. We can see a nerve close to the heart called the phrenic nerve, which inserts to the diaphragm. Then we have the left lung. It has two lobes, namely the cranial and caudal lobe. The cranial lobe has a cranial and caudal part as well. On the dorsal part of the lungs is the pulmonary ligament, which will be cut alongside with the vessels to fully see the lungs. At the medial surface of the lung, we have the aortic impression because of the aorta, cardiac impression from the heart, and the costal impression from the ribs. Mm, we can also see the principal bronchus, which will branch into two lobar bronchi, and the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. Next is the right thoracic cavity. The right lung has four lobes: the cranial, middle lobe, caudal lobe, and the accessory lobe. The accessory lobe is situated behind the caudal lobe, and a part of it is in the mediastinal recess, so you have to carefully remove it. The accessory lobe is more evident in the medial surface of the lung. The principal bronchi would branch out into four lobar bronchi, one for each lobes. Then we have the right pulmonary artery and the veins. The caudal vena cava is much more evident in the right thoracic cavity and the cranial vena cava. They would meet in the right atrium. We have the right phrenic nerve, the vagus nerve, and the azygos vein, which connects in the cranial vena cava onto the right atrium. Next is the parts and passageways of the diaphragm, the caval foramen, aortic hiatus, and the esophageal hiatus. We also have the left and right crus located in the lumbar part of the diaphragm, in the pupillae, in the tendinous center. Side note, we also have the costal part, where the first rib is connected to the diaphragm, and the sternal part where the sternum is connected to the diaphragm.